Good.
Good evening. We're going to call this meeting of the Board of Education order for the Rising City Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, we have one item on our agenda. It's the continuation of the Lighthouse with Mr. Caruso. We're talking about goals. So, hand it over to you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, so we don't need the binders tonight because we sort of reshuffled, and tonight we're gonna talk about goals. Peter and I talked earlier in the week, and from the conversations you had, it sounds like there's several things you all want to do when it comes to goals. I would rather just try to focus on one thing, do it well, but given that you've wanted this conversation for so long, the way I'm planning to approach this, and once I hear a lot of objections, would be we're going to start looking at the goals that you kind of drafted about a year ago, or Jake, earlier this year, last fall.
We started to draft them in the fall and we tabled them until we got to today.
Okay, so I've sort of did a synopsis here, but we'll go over them really quickly because I want you to sort of reflect on how do we do with those? Are they still a priority or not? Should they be included in a conversation about a continuing set of goals? Then we're going to brainstorm, and what I want to do is just collect your thoughts. It might be something related to a district goal. It might be related to something that ends up being an administrative goal. But let's just brainstorm, get the ideas out. We'll sort of match them to the category that we think they need to be in. Also consolidating to make sure we don't have 5 goals that all look the same, break them down into like ideas. And then hopefully come away, if nothing else, with a set of board goals tonight and some good material to continue the conversation for district goals if you feel you need to do that. Because you are in the process of beginning the strategic planning, which will address long-term at least, but you may not want to wait a year to have some impact. So we can have that conversation when we get to that point. Does that all make sense? Is everybody comfortable with that? Good. So let's start with the conversation about the goals as you drafted them originally.
Drafted but not adopted.
Not adopted. Yeah. So, but at some point, collectively, it sounds like you were on board with these ideas, if you didn't have a chance to vote on them or not. But this is what was caught. Let's talk about it because if we're going to do board goals, they may end up continuing on the list. So starting with, and I'll read the one from the paper and I just sort of synopsized it there. First one was ensure all work supports the Greenwich Public Schools strategic plan's academic, personal, and interpersonal goals.
I brought with me the board's self-evaluation, which speaks to that, and I have highlighted just a tiny amount of the lowest rated items. And I'll just quickly go through them. Emphasis on high achievement for all students in the district. Conducts meetings that are efficient, effective, and focus on student achievement. Make decisions based on analysis of relevant research and data. Works effectively with the superintendent as a collaborative leadership team. Focusing on priorities around student achievement. So you see the theme of the self-evaluation, and this is representative of 8 people's schools.
Thank you. Other comments about, I guess one, does this still sound like something the board needs to focus on? And 2, any observations about status to date? If you felt the board is focused on it enough at this point, is it something that you want to continue to prioritize?
I'll say, I think it's got to change from support. We need to make a decision at some point. We have to decide when that point is, whether we're going to continue with the plan we have past its expiration, which is the end of next year, or whether we're going to spend the next year tweaking it or redoing it. But strategic plan is going to, I think, has to be a goal for the board for the next year.
Oh, good. keep that handy. So what I'm hearing is,
That's more.
well, I didn't know whether we needed to summarize it, but it sounds like that's kind of the theme of the meeting, is talking about the strategic plan.
So my thoughts are, because we've had so much change, that I don't think it's a horrible thing to continue the same plan for another year. And we've just finally honed in on a lot of our metrics and the way that we were gonna measure things. So I can see us not having to take next year and create yet another new plan, but just extend it one more year to give us some leeway, especially with a new superintendent.
Dr. Fair says something. That's okay.
I think there's two things I would say. One is, while we created a strategic plan, I don't think we made it the center of our work. I don't think we engaged with it actively. So it's one thing to make a plan, it's another thing to have a plan be your center of what your work is. I also think, and one of the things we talked about at our meeting yesterday, was sort of a diagnostic of this plan, to go through and sort of evaluate it in terms of understanding what the different parts are, how we got there, what is effective, what's not effective, before we necessarily go into the next phase of creating iteration, whatever it may be, to help us as we go into that next stage to really be effective. And I think, to me, that would be a board administrator, superintendent, joint effort of understanding that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What are your existing goals and how are you doing on those? Because when we do IEPs, we look at the students' last set of goals and objectives and say, how did we do on that and where do we need to go forward with a new set of goals? I'm not sure what the old goals were personally, and I don't know how you did with them.
So, Gaetan, I don't know if you want to answer, but it's actually in a policy. There's
Yeah, right,
a policy we adopted, and it's basically the table stakes of showing up to meetings, being respectful. It's the usual stuff. This was our first effort, I think, in at least my time on the board, and I don't know if Jennifer or Barbara can speak to it being done longer, where the board's actually tried to set its own goals apart from what we expect of the district. So this is what the board should be doing and focusing on.
So we don't have one really.
For this year.
Yeah.
Right.
This is it.
And in
That's
my
a short
mind,
answer. Yeah.
in my mind, part of the creation of a strategic plan includes the process for review and analysis or accountability as time goes on. I think it should be part and parcel of the plan is where will we do the sort of random checks or plan checks to assess whether or not we're doing what we're doing. I mean, I've been to too many districts where, hey, whatever happened to that writing program we did or that reading program? Oh, you know what, we'd have to look into that. I don't think we're doing it anymore. It should be part, I frankly think that should, because if we think it's the most important job that we've got is implementing our strategic plan, then we ought to have on our agenda every meeting, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but report on goals or report on strategic plan. And just remind ourselves every meeting, we've got it, it's important, let's pick another aspect of it to talk about it tonight so that we're constantly reminding ourselves and more importantly, letting our staff know that it isn't just something we spend a lot of time and effort creating, but the creation of the plan is not what's important, it's the implementation that's important. So I think that to me is part of a strategic plan is how are we going to assess it or analyze it?
So one of the things is that with our plan, we have goals and we have data that we want to collect, but we don't have clear steps in between of what it is we're going to do. We don't have benchmarks as we go along. So we have a grandiose plan, but no strategies for getting where we want to go. And the other thing is the plan is totally focused on students. There is no focus on leadership in the plan. And I think that's a big gap in the plan.
Just to amplify what Barb said, it's not just leadership, it's people, right? We have almost 1,400 people in the district, and you know, how are they tied to the plan, and what are the goals for them? And I think when it comes to leadership, to me, it's leadership development. So making sure we've got.
It's not just about the students, it's about the adults.
Yep.
Yeah, they're totally missing from the plan.
Well, they may be missing from the dashboard or the one pager with the metrics that are, I'll call them tiles, so everyone knows what I'm talking about. Leadership was not left out of the plan. Leadership was a category in the plan. The district developed a set of annual targets within the leadership category that belonged to the administration, didn't belong to the board. We didn't review it, we didn't ask for it. Leadership was in the plan for absolute certainty. Curriculum was in the plan. And there were other categories like that, but the board focuses on the student part of the strategic plan. We have a set of tiles to measure that, as well as parent satisfaction, academic achievement. But I think, to your point, to put it on the agenda, we have found that the metrics are not real-time metrics, and to put it on at every meeting, we wouldn't have a change in what we're measuring. In other words, it's such a long-term change, transformation that we're working on. The scores wouldn't move between meetings. The student satisfaction wouldn't move between meetings. So maybe we can put it on for quarterly, so it doesn't take up so much time at each meeting.
What I've seen where boards do this isn't necessarily that we have something on every agenda just because if we have an agenda item, we have to have something to report. It might be, there's really nothing to report this month. However, next month we will have gotten the results back of a reading test or something, so we'll be more in depth on that. It might be once a year, if you're establishing a calendar, we might want to focus on a specific area once a year, and if we spread it out over a year, it doesn't seem like we're spending a lot of time, but we're planning out how to focus on. I just like the idea of it's on the agenda because it's important. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have a 45-minute presentation every meeting. That would make us all crazy. But the idea that it's there, and there will be an expectation that we will generally have something to talk about. It might only be a 3-second blurb. It might be, as I say, nothing to report tonight, but the curriculum committee is almost done with the new 4th grade math curriculum. Just wanted you to know we've been focusing on it because it's part of our goals or whatever. So that's neat. I have to remember when I work with this board, I have to be more specific. And I say that kindly. I can't get away with just, just put it on there and talk about it. That's good though, and this is not a complaint. Lauren?
But what we should be talking about is, yes, the metrics don't change, but what we're doing to affect them should be changing all the time, and how are we getting, because we can't find at the end that we didn't meet it when there were signals along the way.
And the other thing to think about is just because you don't need to be involved in the day-to-day decisions, those are administrative. You set the expectation, the administration would typically come back and say, this is how we plan on measuring this. It's not that you have to be an expert on that measurement, but you do need to know what's being done. So the reporting might be, here's sort of where the plan is, here's how we're attacking it. Wouldn't necessarily be minutia of all the details, but as a board member, I need to know that there is a plan, there is a strategy, it's being implemented, and I've been given enough information to be comfortable that it's being done, not necessarily where exactly we are each time. Good point. So I'm getting a sense that this first one, up there now, supporting the strategic plan's goals, whether it's the current one or, and again, you're still using this year's plan while you're creating the next year's. A lot of strategic planning processes, in fact, don't necessarily start over again. Part of the final step of the strategic plan is continuing out that extra year each time. You don't necessarily have to rewrite it every time. So,
yeah, no, I just want to get a general sense. Like, I also, when we say start over, I'm also of the mindset that I don't think that would make sense at this point. So, if we say start over, I think we're saying like start from scratch. And I don't think that anyone. I just want to sort of reiterate the fact that a lot of work has gone into it to this point. Like we've been moving maybe at more of a snail's pace. So, starting over wouldn't be. I wouldn't be in favor of that. think like, we're tweaking it, right, if anything.
Just keeping it, you don't want it to stay static, you want it to move
Yeah,
forward.
that's-
Whether, again, and if you did the work well the first time, it might not hurt to review the goals at some point. But if they're done well, they're not gonna change that dramatically. You might need to think about the strategies or the tasks going forward, how they might change, or what you need to do to support it differently. But,
Just to round it up. So, although I guess Mr. Sheriff's still missing. I agree, let's just tweak it for the year, and then we have a new superintendent coming in, and it'll allow her to sort of see what we have, finish it up, and then she could be instrumental, of course, in evaluating if we need to completely revamp it, or if we need just to tweak it a little further.
I'm glad you said that, I was trying to figure out how to work that in, but glad it came from one of instead. All right, so it sounds like most of you, if anybody else wants to comment, but most of you seem comfortable with the idea of sort of reviewing it and tweaking it without necessarily going through a whole plan again, but continuing the work.
I'd like it to be more than a light review. I mean, I feel like I would say we did a reasonable job for beginners on a strategic plan, but, you know, I think there's a lot for all of us to learn from that experience. And while I don't see us making any dramatic changes in the higher level, I think there's a lot of ways that it could be improved. And so I think a good diagnosis of the process of what went well, what didn't go well, diagnosis is the wrong term, sorry, and I should know better. You know, I think would be a good idea. And I wonder if that's something, and one of the things we had talked about was, you know, do we have someone come in from the outside to help us evaluate that, sort of what process do we do to help, so that we all sort of are in a better place if we're thinking about whether it's small changes, moderate changes, or where we want to go from there.
Another thing, just to remind everybody from last time when we talked about the role of the board and I brought out the worksheet which really sort of quantifies what the board should be doing or thinking about in support of that strategic plan. That's an exercise that as you begin that review process, you could be thinking about, okay, what do we have to commit to in order to make sure, because even just rewriting the existing plan or updating it or even just recommitting to it, if nothing else changes, the results aren't going to change. So it's really, what does this board, what are you willing to commit to ensure the success of it? And I think that's a conversation for sort of close to the end of the process rather than at the beginning, once you know what needs to be done.
I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a lot. The other thing that I think is sort of interesting to think about is, you know, community engagement in the plan, and sort of trying to find that balance of wanting to hear from the community, wanting to make sure that different stakeholders are engaged in this, because I think it's really important. On the other hand, if we aren't planning on making any significant changes, you know, what are we doing with that information if we already sort of have a mindset about what we're going to do? So I'm not sure how to balance those two things, but I think they're important points to think about.
I think the appropriate time to go out to the community is at the last year of the plan, which is 2020. We present what we believe has been achieved, and then we move on and explain that we are going to enter the next phase of the strategic plan. And I don't think we should do anything at all in 2019. Frankly, literally last 2 weeks we got metrics. I mean, it's just premature.
Hearing no objections. So it sounds like it's going to remain a goal. I think we're still at a point, this is called slow brainstorming. I usually would, well, we're still on the goals, so we haven't even started the rest of it yet. But I think it's important because you did talk about these things, you thought they were important, and obviously they still are. Your second one was increased board and committee effectiveness, including participating in Lighthouse, but just the whole concept of board effectiveness. It sounds to me like you're committed to that. I'm hearing a lot of we want to do better. So I would say that, you know, when we come time to prioritize what you think are goals, would probably be on my list, but this is gonna depend on what you, as we go through this conversation, how much we have on the list, because we don't want to add to too many items. If you have too many things on here, they won't get done. So, comments on it?
Yeah.
Or-
I just don't understand how you can have a goal that you can't measure. I mean, I harangue anyway, the administration about setting goals and measuring them. SMART goals are sort of, you're gonna put on my tombstone probably, but I think that's been my objection from the beginning. You measure what you value. Well, I don't even know what the word effectiveness means. Increase the board effectiveness. I mean, so we need to have goals that are really clear and that they're measurable, or else we'll be sitting here next year saying, what did we do?
Well, Jennifer brought out the board evaluation, just as I was thinking about commenting on it, but you go ahead.
So to put it into words, the board works effectively with the superintendent as a collaborative leadership team to boost priorities around high achievement for all students in the district. I think that defines what it means to be effective. It says who you're working with, how you're going to work with them, what you're going to focus on. So I think that's a good encapsulation.
And the other thing, for example, some boards sometimes can be a lot of extra work for somebody to do that, but they'll start to keep track of how much time they're devoting to student achievement issues at a board meeting versus management issues. If we want to be more effective, we're going to spend more time talking about things that are the product of our work, not the work itself. In fact, going back to original Lighthouse data from way back when, they found that boards that participated actively in Lighthouse training doubled the amount of time that they've spent at their board meetings focused on student achievement. So that's another, to say we will increase the time, even just looking at agendas, how many agenda items do we typically have that relate to student achievement versus after we've set this goal and worked actively on it, that should change. So, and to me, that's a metric. Is it a number? Somewhat, but not, and I understand what you're saying, but I think for this board, and again, going back to the board evaluation, when you evaluate yourselves, and you ask the question, because I think that's another place it's very permissible to have this conversation about these goals, is during your board evaluation. How are we doing on our goals? Have we become more effective? You'll have opinions on that, and you should share them with each other.
Wouldn't you want to be delineating specifically what you want to be more effective at doing? Like the specific, effective at what?
Yeah, I think that's
And then I
legitimate.
think that would lead more easily toward a potential.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that would be part.
How about I start?
I like that.
Well, good parts of it.
That's okay, I'm glad I'm not recording.
And I'm not sure as I frame out how we're going to work tonight, whether that's something we would try to resolve tonight, or say the goal is, here's what the goal is, and that will be articulated either by the policy committee or, I don't know. I want to think that through as we go along our work tonight. I'm not sure we'll be able to get all of that written down in one evening. Yes?
I mean, and these are just ideas about the effectiveness, like, are we all prepared for meetings? Did everybody read their materials? Is there a better way to, ask questions? Because I don't think anybody enjoys staying at each meeting till past 11 o'clock at night.
It used to be later.
And now that, how many of us work full-time? Like, it's something to think about, I think.
I think those are all important things. If nobody makes good decisions after 11 o'clock, everybody's worked, everybody's tired.
I mean, to me, it's about how we spend our time and what we spend our time on, right? And it's not just the board, it's the committees. Are the committees actively working and reporting back to the board so that every board member doesn't need to go through every little nuance, right? That's why you have a committee process. And, we've had our ups and downs with committees, let's be honest about it. So how can we be more effective with that, with the agenda setting, the time that we spend during meetings? Maybe we need a timer on items, right? We used to, on our agendas, set, if this item's gonna be 20 minutes. It seemed arbitrary, but every time, and usually it was when I was not on the board, I'd watch and I'd be like, they're blowing through the time. it means that they have no idea how long they should talk about this or where this discussion is gonna go.
But I think in framing the agenda, the chair and the superintendent together can say, you know, the presentation part, because you can control that. That's going to be 10 minutes, or that'll be 15 minutes. If the board wants to spend an hour beating it to death, unless somebody here invokes procedure and says, you know, I call a question, or et cetera.
Move to limit discussion.
Yeah, but you could set, as part of this conversation, you could set ground rules for your board meetings and say that, you know, board members are limited to 5 minutes, for example. It doesn't sound like a lot, but 5 minutes is a very long time. Especially when you think about public comment, which is usually limited to 2 or 3 minutes. That's a long time, and frankly, often, especially if it's late in the evening, your eyes are starting to glaze over and you don't want to, you owe nobody that. And that happens amongst yourselves too, if you're going on about something. So I think it's fair to say, and again, sometimes that's a very good conversation, treating it like a board evaluation. Tonight we're going to talk about how we can improve our meeting structure, and say we'll request the chair to limit conversations to 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever, and then you've got the weight of the board saying, these are the ground rules, you're out of order.
Well, the other bit is deciding what we're going to talk about. So basically, towards the last meeting of the year, the chair of the Policy Governance Committee proposes the meeting schedule for the entire year with, these are the topics that are going to come up this year based on what our policies say, or just interest that the board has expressed. We never really debate or discuss that. It kind of comes and goes like that. It's not an item we spend a lot of time on. So I don't know, you know, it's asking a lot of PGC to try to do it earlier. It's asking a lot of board members to actually try to get comments in, which we know doesn't always happen. I'm guilty of it too.
And I maybe because I tend to speak a lot, I'm a little hesitant because I think we get real work done if we actually have conversations. That's different than just speaking, right? But if we have real conversations about important issues, I feel like that's when you get things done. So my approach would be to try and have us have fewer things that we're talking about, have them be things that are really important, and try and keep our conversations to board level discussions, but not necessarily to restrict ourselves too tightly on the amount of time. So we've started talking about next year and trying to figure out what are the things we want to do that are most important and how do we structure the year around that. And then the next step is going to be how we try and keep the rest not too overwhelming so that we can focus on the things that are most important.
I have an opposite point of view. I think the formal business meeting with the time limits is a really good idea. And I think those extended conversations should happen in committee, and that should be reported out to the board. And then those not on the board committee, can use that time to question those on the committee about why they took certain routes, how they made certain decisions. But I do think that that formal business meeting should have a section that says, these are the topics, these are the time limits, and we get out by 10:30.
Kathleen?
I guess I'm somewhere in between. I think that it would be really nice to have a little bit, to be more efficient, and I'm gonna try to keep this down to 30 seconds. Thankfully, I talk quickly. So, I think it'd be really nice if we, and you know, we run schools where we put priority on some classes being longer than others, and lunch for some reason only being 20 minutes, but that's a separate topic. So, 22. So I think we are smart enough to figure out that we should spend a lot of time on evaluating the STAR math report and less time on making sure that, you know, all the transfers go through or something like that. So I think if we said from, you know, 6:20 to 6:30, we're going to do this, but this is a really long topic where we need to debate it. Let's allow 30 minutes for that.
Well, that's why I said typically where a process like this exists, the chair and the superintendent are given some latitude as part of the conversation. We're going to talk about those test scores, and that's important. So maybe it's a 20-minute presentation, you know. But the key is that when 20 minutes is up, somebody, Peter, says, you know,
We're done.
We're done.
Right.
And typically what will happen is the first time, because it's usually an administrator, will go over, superintendent says, you went over, don't do it again. You know, and we will speak to fill whatever time we are allowed. You can always extend it if you choose to, but I think it's important to have some limitations if you want to get work done effectively.
So once upon a time, we had a different meeting structure, and I talked to the people on the board at that time that set the meeting structure. They had a working meeting, and then they had a business meeting. And the working meeting was to discuss the meatier topics, so that when you got to the business meeting, questions got answered, the discussion went as smoothly and quickly, and you could get through your business meeting. What ultimately ended up happening is it felt like we were having a repeat of the meeting, and you know, it's probably like deja vu for the administrators. Mary shaking her head, so we know it's true. That we basically revisited the same stuff 2 meetings in a row. So this is the first year we've been on a different meeting path, which is 1 business meeting a month. The other we're alternating sort of between board development and retreats. The retreats were meant for those meatier topics where we want more of the conversational. And I guess it's on us as we build the agenda, the whole board, that we need to make sure that the meatier topics stay on those retreats. If there's action that needs to happen, that can happen at the public meeting, but those discussions should happen at those retreats. And we won't have Lighthouse next year, so that frees up some of the space. Sorry, Nick. I mean, we'd love to have you back if we visit any time. But it frees up some of the space because we should be looking at our academic areas maybe in the fall, maybe in the spring, not once a year, and then we have to wait a whole another year for that to cycle back to us.
It sounds like you have a structure in place that could work very well. It's a matter of just sort of sticking to it.
We're still learning.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the first year with the schedule, so.
Yeah.
Right.
But it sounds like it's workable and it would meet the needs of both of you, that, you know, we want to get the business done in an orderly fashion and quickly. And then we want to have time for those meatier discussions, and I think that's fine. So I'd say, again, it sounds like the commitment I'm hearing from board members is, let's just make that better. Let's try to get that to a point where it's working more effectively.
But in the world of developing goals, you need to have a vision of where you want to be, and the goal is how you're going to get there. So the board goal could be that you want to come up with a meeting structure that allows you to spend more time discussing pertinent issues and keeps business meetings to an appropriate amount of time. That's your goal. And then in June, you can say, have we done that? You know, we've gotten to where business meetings are 2 hours, we knock off business agendas, and we have 2 meetings a month where we put a topic on the table, give people some information to review, and then just sit around and talk about what does this mean to us as a board? How do we see this should be affecting our district? So your goal for the year would be to come up with a meeting structure that allows you to do that. And then at the end of the year, you can say, do we have it or not?
Gets us out by 10:30.
The board used to get done in time to actually go out and socialize afterwards. It doesn't happen anymore.
My very first board meeting,
Before you got here.
What was that?
the first meeting I chaired, I set a personal goal of getting out by 11, and everybody laughed. And I think we got out at 11:30, but for us, that was actually pretty good. But it's a work in progress, like everything else. But again, it's some of the responsibilities on the chair to move things along, but all of you can do that just by using procedure. You know, if somebody's repeating something for the 3rd or 4th time, and there's an understanding we're not going to do that anymore, you know, I'd like to call a point of order. I'm just hearing the same things being repeated over and over again. Can we move on?
Right.
And I think the chair has enough authority to do that in most cases. If not, you can do it procedurally. Just call the question, move the question, whatever you want to do.
Right.
So all of you can accept some responsibility for making your meetings go smoother. It doesn't have to fall all on the chair, although we all need the help when we can get it. All right, so, and I guess the question I would ask is, because I'm hearing a commitment to do it, but I don't know, does it have to remain a goal? At this point, if you're going to limit yourselves to 4 or 5 goals, is that one that has to remain a goal or not? And that's your.
I don't know if you go back to the list Jennifer read from our self-evaluation. I think we need to police ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's a goal. I think it's a goal.
I do. Okay.
And the other part of it, as drafted, was also about committees, and I don't
Yes.
want to lose the thread on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are
Yes.
trying to push to get committees posted, to have agendas, to have minutes. but it's also what the committees are doing and how they report back to the board,
And can we share committee work?
and how we share committee work.
Sorry.
Good ad, no, it's a good ad. I believe that, there are
Reading
eight
in
of us.
that several people do most of it, and
I wouldn't say most of it, but there's some unfair shares of it.
I think one of the, I don't know, because I know with policy governance it might be a little different, but in many policy manuals, there's a section on subcommittees, and it talks about what the charge is and the expectation of the subcommittee, because that can vary. And for example, some committees kind of just decide on their own, here's what we want to talk about. You know, this is a topic that's interesting to us, or we've heard in the community, so let's talk about X. Versus all work going through the chair at a meeting saying, we'll, you know, send this to the policy committee for review. The benefit to that is, one, there's some level of control, because if we have a committee, the fact that it exists means we have to find work for it, and not that it isn't important work, but remember, for every meeting that you're all struggling with, your administration is also doing that, because they've got to staff them, they have to prepare for them, and if you're getting a report, somebody's going to be writing that report and then presenting it. So should there be some level of control over those committees and what they require of the staff? It's some committees, they do have pretty much free reign. That works fine as long as some certain people are chairs, but then you can see a change when someone else comes in and it's their chance to do something different. So the more regulated, and it's probably not the right word, the more regulated your committee structure is, the less likelihood it goes for abuse.
Our policy talks about reevaluating yearly the committees and then sort of reinstating them to some extent. And it clearly states that, you know, it's at the direction of the board. And
Okay, so, but is that enforced? Because I'm getting a sense you've got some rules, but in some cases, maybe they're not being applied right. And I don't know if in this case if it is or not.
Right, there's the difference between standing and ad hoc, so we actually just added a strategic planning committee with sort of an amorphous. The standing committees, I think we have a pretty decent sense of what they are, although budget is still kind of a work in progress. I think that's a better way to describe it. So yeah, we probably should work to do that.
That's something that I've done with a number of boards where we spend the evening kind of just reviewing committee process and how to streamline it or make it better. So that's something we can talk about if you felt the need. I think I've mentioned before in Shelton they had 9 subcommittees. And they had 9 subcommittees because they had 9 board members and everybody got to chair a committee. So no, that's how they structure it. You get a committee, what do you want? And in one case somebody said, well, I'm really interested in the cafeteria and sports. So they had a committee called Cafeteria and Athletics. And the first question I had, so what do they do?
That would kill you.
They played sports in cafeteria.
I'm good with that.
or maybe they ate.
And, you know, but this was part of their lighthouse work, and it was toward the end, so they recognized that that was not a good use of their time or the staff's time. So they went down to 3, and that was teaching and learning, finance, which included facilities where necessary, and policy. And they did it with just 3 committees. And like, what are we going to do now? What about all the stuff we do? And we literally did a chart and said, okay, let's talk about what the committees did. And, you know, we do this. That could be written as a policy, give it to administration. You don't need to make this a board decision. There's a lot of stuff that you can find can be directed through policy to administration. The added benefit is you get more consistency. Because face it, when you have a board and not everybody's there, depending on the consistency of who's at the meeting that night, something may or may not pass. Whereas if the policy, and we usually have less fractious conversations about policy than we do about the decisions. So we have the conversation theoretically in the policy, and then the administration can apply those policies much more consistently than we might do as a board. So again, one of those kind of questions that we should be asking all the time is this something the board should be doing, or is there another way of giving that to the appropriate people? Okay. Effectively communicate expectations and accomplishments related to student outcomes. We've heard a lot about some of those things already tonight. There's a real desire by this board to have a better structure for doing that. Am I right? Okay, good. Just reality check here. Comments?
In reality, there's no way to do that because we didn't have the metrics in place so that we could communicate to the community on the entire strategic plan. The best example of how we communicate is going out to every RTM district to talk about the budget, what's in it, and setting our priorities through the budget process. But there are many things we're working on that aren't specific budget items, right? And the public has no clue. Well, I shouldn't say that. Kim Eves does a wonderful job of placing articles when she can, highlighting certain achievements, but they're usually by small groups of students. They're not an overall view. Is that fair, Kim? They're not an overall view of the district. So I would like to see us go out to every single neighborhood association and have a meeting on how we're doing. In order to do that, we have to have targets that are measured, and we need to arrive at a common understanding as a group of 8 that it's important for us to be accountable to the public for our strategic plan.
So let me raise this to a different level, because I don't want to solve the problem tonight.
Okay.
I want
Just
to
wanna-
articulate, it's a good way of sort of articulating how we can perceive the problem, I think, is ways of looking where we aren't necessarily doing it well. But to me, the idea is there needs to be better communication with the public, and it isn't disseminating more. I mean, just coming up with another brochure or another way of telling people the story is half of it. I think the other part is engaging them in the conversations. Tell me what you think as well. And so I'd say, as a communication strategy, I see the sign up there, you have a communications person, I guess. You have a little car parked right there where it says communications, okay. So you have an advantage already in somebody helping you craft the message. The question is, has the board prioritized enough what the message is in order for Kim to do her job better? So I would say the conversation at the board level might be more of what is the message, and some of that's articulated by, well, here's our goals, this is what we said we want to do. Vision plus plan, articulating the strategic plan and then sharing the results is how we make sure people understand what we're doing. I may have mentioned this before, but I love what they do in New Canaan, which is every time they pass something, what's our talking point?
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah.
I like that.
And it's a very powerful, effective way of everybody on the board going out and, and not to mention if anybody's watching on television, they're hearing it there too, but there's more consistency and it's better messaging. So I think the board's probably really, by focusing on the goals, on the expectations of students, and having those conversations at your board meetings, it then gives you the story to tell. And helping frame that work is really, what's our story? Because you have the professionals to help get the story out. And strategy, I think, is a great one of getting out to more areas, to new audiences. But really the board level, the 30,000 foot level is, what's that message got to be? What tactics will we use as much as what is the message, what is it that we need to do? So, comments?
As I was thinking about my list, one of the things with communication that I also thought about is, whether we should be actively engaging in terms of going to the RTM or going to the BET early in the process of something. And I think particularly as we're struggling with some capital project questions, should we change a little bit how we do this, and should we engage that communication early? And should we be going to them to try and spread this information and to give them that information? And should that be another piece of sort of a communication plan that we would think about?
The module we do, and you will do, assuming we'll get to it, on community engagement, we actually call community leadership, because we don't want you to leave it to someone else to take the leadership in ensuring that everybody's talking to each other, that you become the leaders in the community, say, we have to reach out to the RTM, we have to reach out to Mayor, First Selectman. You know, it's our job to make sure these conversations take place. They're instrumental in making it happen too, but we take the leadership role in making sure it happens. So, and hopefully that module, which we typically do in 2 sessions, because there's a lot to it, will really give you some good answers to some of the questions that are probably percolating right now. But we talk about, well, first we do an analysis. We actually ask you 12 questions about how this board engages the community, specifically related to student achievement. We go through that evening, we use the little response clickers, and we talk about those things. Then we come back the second time, we talk about what a good communications plan usually looks like, and we look at your results and try to strategize. You can't do it all, but what are the 2 or 3 things that would make most sense based on your conversation about where you want to put your attention. So I hope you'll find that very helpful when the time comes. So I'm hearing a lot about you feel there's a need to continue this. It sounds like we're not going to get away with cutting some of these if we keep
Well,
going.
communication, I mean, the effective communication and then the broad engagement sort of come together, so if you want to read what the next one is, I think
Yeah, broaden engagement and collaboratively work to ensure understanding of Board of Ed by town bodies and constituencies.
yeah, so you can collapse those two.
Absolutely. I think that's part of an overall communication strategy. And then pass and advocate for an operating and capital budget that meets district needs and board budget priorities, including master facilities plan.
I mean, that's a legal requirement. I don't see that as a goal. You can't exist unless you do it. It's kind of like putting a goal that when you wake up, you open your eyes, in my view. It's
Okay.
just taken for granted.
Contrary to you, I don't think we do a very good job advocating for our needs. I think some of it is the getting out earlier. We basically wait until it's sitting at the RTM to go out to the districts. We don't proactively do a lot before then, right? We go to the BET budget hearing, but not everybody can go to that. And typically that's just me, the super, and Lori sitting at a table. I think there's a need for more participation in getting that budget message out there as early as we can, as often as we can.
I mean, Jennifer's right, you gotta pass the budget. I mean, that's the law. That's like saying we have to, but the question is, do you put the emphasis on pass the budget or is it advocate? And I think, which frankly could still be rolled into that communication goal. I don't know that, depending on your needs, but I don't know that needs to be a separate goal as much as one of the strategies in our communications is to make sure that we are out there earlier getting buy-in. And frankly, I get requests all the time, if we're gonna start getting the budget, how do we get the community to accept the budget? What do we need to do? I said, start the day after the last referendum, because it should be a year-round process, and it's more about here's what we're doing rather than here's why we need the money. I think if you get people to buy into the vision, into the strategic plan, they understand that not only is there a plan, but we're doing it, that there's greater likelihood that people will support that through their vote, which is ultimately the metric that you need to find out if you did it well or not. But I would say that you probably could roll that into that communication goal as well. Okay, well, I figured about 20 minutes. But I think a lot of this conversation will carry over to other parts of what we're going to talk about, so I'm not that worried about it. So before we go to the next part where I want to just sort of do a free-form brainstorming, comments, observations, how do you feel about where we are right this minute? Should I pack up and go, or are we okay?
I mean, by my count, we've got strategic plan, effectiveness, and communications. Those are the 3 that kind of came out of that discussion.
I think it'd be interesting to see, oh gosh, do I need this? I think it'd be interesting to see when we, if we do all make a concerted effort with the timing and keep the focus on academics. Then when we do get to communications, it'll be a clean message because we'll have spent more time focusing on student achievement, which will then, I think they're all going to tie in together. I mean, they really do. I think we've, on paper at least, we've seemed to have set a few goals that lead. One will, being effective and efficient in one of them is going to ultimately have a positive effect on another, component. So, I mean, they look very true.
One of the things with us trying to be effective and efficient means that the reports that we get from the administrators need to follow the template that's been set, so they are concise and they answer the questions that are in the template, so that we don't have to keep going digging and asking 100 questions. So it's a teamwork sort of thing of the administration giving us concise reports with the data that's needed, and then us staying on topic.
You have a lot of control over whether, all of you collectively have a lot of control over how effective the meetings are. And if anybody starts to stray, you all have an obligation and the power to bring it back. And sometimes it's not easy. Peter doesn't seem like a shy person as chair anyway, which is what you want. I mean, you want somebody that's not unwilling to tap the gavel if necessary and move things along. I think it's important, but you all have the ability to help that. And I would say you have a lot of control over that. I think, from what I'm sensing, you have a meeting structure in place that could do really well. It's a question of just staying to that process as best you can. And I think that part of your charge is to figure out how to do that. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other things that you feel are priorities. Now, and I did send that sheet out ahead of time. That's kind of a general thing. You may not have found something for every category, just to get the creative juices going. But what I want to do is basically really straight brainstorming. We're not going to comment on them other than maybe clarify, so I may ask for clarification on something to make sure we get it written down right. But just really to get the ideas out, then we're going to try to figure out what's aligned with each other and sort of group them together and what's appropriate for this conversation about board goals versus should it go on those for district or admin, or we're not sure yet. So I'm looking for some volunteers. Okay,
I'll throw out the first one because I mentioned it to you before. We have a new superintendent coming in, so we need to onboard her.
That was my number one, too.
I'm shocked.
She did
You
share.
had a lot of
that's an important one, very important.
I don't know the list, but Havemeyer said this was a diagnostic analysis of our current strategic plan, sort of evaluation of our current plan. And I put that under teamwork, which I don't know if that was cheating a little bit, but I really feel like that's a team effort and a team product. And with that, I also said as a goal is to have us feel like the cabinet administration and board are on the same team. And I put their effective board and agenda meetings, and I think in a lot of ways, all of that kind of comes together.
Some of that falls onto the already existing goal about effective boards.
Yeah.
So we've added the whole issue of, and that still gets back to the first one on strategic planning. I think that could probably be rolled into that.
So on strategic plan, I know, but I want to carry off of what Keaton was saying. I actually wrote down ensure all work aligns with the strategic plan, and I think that has to be on everybody's list.
Yeah.
And I'll shut up.
So this is a question for you, based on your experience with other boards. I think we need a look at TEPL as it relates to the strategic plan, and TEPL stands in for the state teacher evaluation process, but we have a customized one in Greenwich.
Teacher evaluation.
Oh, sorry. Okay, it's so long I can't remember the name. Basically, the board very rarely gets a view of how the pieces all fit together. That's one very important piece. How do other boards handle it? Because we understand where management is and where board work is, and there's a line between them. But we need a very high-level view of how teachers are being evaluated on items that move the district forward embedded in the strategic plan.
I would say that, well, state statute says there should be an annual report on evaluation. So you're already getting something. The question is it meeting the needs of the board in terms of what is being presented to us? Is that enough for us to understand the process or not? I think it's important for the board to understand the process of evaluation. How many observations does a teacher get if they're under intensive versus just that regular 3-year cycle for most teachers? What happens if a teacher's on intensive? What interventions take place? Again, at the high level, but we should understand what happens in the evaluation process as part of our role as governance to make sure it's being done. What is difficult is because if we want to get into the weeds, we can say, well, how do I know it's being done properly? I want to see some examples. Well, we can't see examples. But I think it's important, plus to understand so that the decisions you make about changes in curriculum or new programming or, going back to when we look at this list, if we're going through making decisions, how does it impact? And that might be a question on that template is, how does this impact evaluation? We're going to probably have one of those questions say, how does this influence professional development? Well, does it also influence what happens in evaluation? Does something that we're asking the teachers to do impact the evaluation process? So I think it's important to have a chance to ask those questions, probably as part of that annual report on evaluations. I know we had one where 95% of our teachers were rated excellent at the high school. We got that report. That was the second report. The first report was half our freshman class had failed at least one major subject. And I, kind of this young punk kid on the board at the time, I kind of raised my hand and said, can you explain to me how half our kids failed at least one major subject, but 95% of our teachers are excellent? First answer, honest answer, it's not our fault, we just got them there, it's first marking period, so it's middle school's fault. That was their response. That wasn't good enough, so they came back and said, well, the question then was, well, what percentage of teachers were rated excellent at the middle school? It's like 87%. So, that wasn't enough. So I think that's where boards have to kind of help us understand how we align our evaluation with expectations. And in fairness, this was 25 years ago, teachers were evaluated on behavior more than they were reviewed on success. So they were modeling behavior back then, and if they did it right, if the class was compliant versus necessarily learning, then the teacher was rated excellent, which is better than one of our retired superintendents that does policy work said when he was an incoming teacher, they evaluated based on whether the blinds were at 45 degrees. That was a metric on his evaluation. So we've come a long way, but I think that's,
Stay here.
but that's part of your role as a board is because you, when you renew that plan, it's done with the teachers, but it's ultimately the board's evaluation tool. Those are the times when you're creating it to ask, do we have the right questions in place? Is this plan going to answer those questions that we've got? So I think that's the important time to focus on that.
Is intensive, just a clarification, is intensive the same as like a tip, like a teacher improvement plan? You said intensive, is that what
Well,
that is?
it might be just that it's part of their plan. The way it was explained to us way back when was we might have 2 observations a year for a normal teacher. Intensive might be once a month. So it was just a more demanding evaluation schedule. And obviously the principal or whatever person was in charge of that teacher would have strategies and things that would be more focused on improvement. So, and that I think was typically, should have been a third maybe, but we had 95% excellence, so we only had 5%.
The other thing too is modeling appropriate behavior and academic success. I mean, I know obviously like 45-degree angle of the blinds, and I remember having one with someone saying once like, oh, you have an outdated exit plan strategy, or the sign is outdated, the room, and I was like, that does have to do with my teaching. But the modeling appropriate behavior, I think should still be as important in a lot of ways as academic success. So we may have, you know, that's how you're going to get the academic success, is modeling the right behavior. So I think that actually we need to look at both of those instead of just say like, it used to be behavior and now it's academics. They go together.
Yes, oh, I would absolutely agree with that. And some of it is the interaction with students that has really not to do with instruction per se, but the relationships you're building up. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things, but in the total absence of performance in the old days was not the way to go.
I get that.
Yeah.
So actually, the board will get an update on our TEPL because this next year they are going to have their 3-year pause that they had for our new indicators. So in May, I think it's May, you'll be getting an update, and we can do some work ahead of time if you want in one of your workshops.
May is next
How many more meetings and workshops do we
Should we have
have?
a vacation before then?
No, I'll be here next week.
So it sounds like, so I guess looking whatever area we go in, does that sound like there's enough there to meet a goal? Or is it a question when that report comes in to be thoughtful about what you're hearing and ask the questions, think about the questions you'd want to ask to make sure that it's aligned with where you're trying to go as a district? I mean, to me, the big question is our evaluation process supporting classroom instruction? And that, in my mind, that's what I'd want to be looking for. Again, that is, we're sort of jumping around with the Lighthouse work, but one of the outcomes we hope that you'll get is to understand how important quality instruction is, and everything that we do is to enhance that. So evaluation isn't to punish bad teachers, it's to help make better teachers. It's a,
I don't know if this is related or not. I don't know if this is related or not.
Give me a second, I will
No, it's okay, I'm just gonna talk. I had the pleasure of getting to go to New Lab with Mr. Mayo because I missed the hoopla kickoff, and I got to go into some of the classrooms and sit with some of the students and look at some of their work. And I think there was a time we used to be able to go and do that as board members a little bit more frequently. So I don't know if it's a goal, but is there a way to have us experience what's happening in school a little bit more intimately than we've been able to?
Absolutely, ask us.
All you do
One of
is
the
ask.
things I'm not able to. We'd love to take school science.
Absolutely.
It's awesome.
But I think it should be something that we all do.
Yes. Well, I do it with my kids all the time. I feel like I've been to school every
And
day.
eat in the cafeteria.
I've been to school every day.
While doing sports.
I think it's important, I mean, that you work so hard to improve achievement, and what better way to validate that than to see it in practice. I think the strong point is, though, that you want to have it as a planned, organized
Yes.
session,
Right.
not just wandering into schools
Right.
haphazardly. And I think of a district very close to here, I won't say it was here, this was many, many years ago, where a superintendent had to actually tell a teacher, and tell a board member, if you keep visiting that particular classroom, you'll be arrested for trespassing, because she was interfering with the teacher in the classroom, constantly berating her, criticizing her work. That's why, where there are rules about board members in classrooms, that's why. And so, as part of a planned, organized thing, picking up from Mr. Mayo, I'd love to see this new program. They want you to see this stuff, because what better way to validate the work than to see it in practice?
But we should be more proactive about it and communicate like the great things that, we're seeing,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Engagement piece. I wish I took you yesterday with me. I had such a fabulous experience. I spoke to the teacher and I'm like, has the administration showed up for this? This is amazing. It was this wonderful speech. It was just great.
So here's part of how we align what we talked about with Lighthouse with making this happen. When we're filling out our little thing here and we're talking about a new program, and one of it is how are we gonna know whether it's working or not? We write right into that motion, it will be reported every June or May or whatever would be timely. And part of that conversation is, oh man, it just zipped right out. But the idea that it could be, is there an appropriate time, that was where I was going, sorry. Is there an appropriate time as we're looking at reviewing this where we could, as part of our progress report, could we see some way see this in practice, whether it's maybe a demonstration at a board meeting, maybe it's going to the school.
Love that.
But yeah, I'd say that that's easily part of your strategy for decision making. Not only when will we get reports, but how can we visualize those reports
Right.
differently?
That's the key word, visualize it. Because remember when we had the innovation where it was like a dozen
Yeah.
teachers or so
Yeah.
came and talked about some of the new things that they were working.
Yeah.
Like it just made it so much
Yeah.
clearer,
Right,
not a bunch of us hot air talking about. So-
good idea.
I'm not doing a very good job of sticking to quick ideas and going to the next one, but I think it's important that you're getting a chance to talk about this stuff. Somebody else that hasn't offered an idea yet, if you did work on that chart, if not, another idea for a goal, yes.
We're still on number one, right? Teamwork?
We can be wherever you want.
No, so I just have, I think we've hit all of them except for the other one I have, which I think is generally a goal, is best practices across departments and schools. As a long-term goal, maybe that's an administrative goal, but I have seen, and I think perhaps it is an administrative goal, but I don't necessarily see, for example, best practices across math across all of the schools, or humanities across all the schools. So that's what I'm talking about, like a long-term goal. Since you're looking at me like you don't understand what I'm saying.
No, I'm trying to just understand, well, I am trying to understand.
So I'm gonna keep going.
Well, let me see if I can, so your concern is,
I'm not concerned, I think
create-
it's a goal.
well,
Right.
the goal reflects a concern.
Okay, fair.
But what you're looking to, I'm putting words in your mouth, I know,
Okay.
is that we're looking to create something or to improve something. We've voted on a new initiative, perhaps, or we've identified third grade reading, for example, is an
Right.
issue in the district. What are we doing to ensure that that is being taught consistently throughout the district?
Something, yes.
Something-
I
something
mean,
like
this is,
that.
this is more even just, since I'm a parent with kids in elementary school and middle school, I have, sorry, Aaron, am I messing up? Sorry.
Use or not to use it.
You will hear from various people, oh, that's interesting, your child's doing that at X school in that program. That's not happening at my school. Why? And maybe because, and I'm not saying at one school is better than the other, let's model where we're doing the best, right? Maybe this is just a simple best practices across all schools and all disciplines, I guess is perhaps the best way to.
So, I'm just, you mean, what you want to do is see that, I'm asking you, you're saying is share, so if you have success someplace, are we sharing that across?
Right, and I think we are, but I just think it's something that you could always, you should keep doing. I mean, I think we are doing that. I think I know the middle schools do that. I don't know if the elementary schools do, but I'm sure they do. I'm not saying that they don't. But I just think it's, I mean, you should always be looking to improve, and that's just a
I
good
mean,
long-term goal.
For example, I think the expectation of the board should be, is there fidelity to what we're supposed to be teaching?
Right.
And I do understand, though, that, for instance, you might have two elementary schools, and either the children are, have different needs, or whether you have certain strengths within your staff, and one staff may be trained in a particular style of instruction that's different than another school. I see the needs for, we have to make sure that whatever school the children go to, they learn what's expected.
Yeah.
So there might be the need for some flexibility in how it's done in different buildings,
That's right.
but do we know for a fact that it's not an accident? Or if they're doing it here and it's being done really well, I don't know if I'd want to ask the question exactly this, but why aren't we doing it here?
That's probably right. Or, I mean, the perfect time you see it is the transition point. So everyone comes to middle school, you have a bunch of elementary schools feeding into a particular middle school, and you will sometimes find they'll start to sort of share amongst themselves. Well, that's interesting that you learned that. I didn't. Why not?
So-
And that's when you start to see the hiccups.
So what I was trying to get at, what I'm hearing is really, is there a consistency of practice?
Right,
Fidelity?
Implementing with fidelity.
Yes.
right.
So,
So I thought that'd be simpler to explain.
But you gotta remember though that
I get it, I just-
it's not, doesn't mean sameness.
No,
Yeah.
It's not gonna be the same from Mrs. Smith to Mrs. Jones in the same building.
correct.
We gotta be careful about expecting that, because it's exactly what we don't want since we're into personalized learning. But I'd like to say as a goal is that we should try and get our budget to truly reflect our priorities, and that we do a better job of going out to asking principals and coordinators, or maybe we need more contact with them during the budget building, to get to know what their priorities are. We get priorities from central office, which I'm sure they do try and gather others, but I think we need to look at our budget and say, yep, these are our priorities for the coming year or 2 years, and this is our budget. You can't do that with our budget now.
Which is what Peter brought up earlier, as part of the conversation we had about that fifth goal. Okay, I don't want to lose the first conversation, but I'm trying to think where we want to put this. I want to just make sure we captured it here. In the right budget alignment. Which could probably fit under that structure part, because I think that's that's how you would approach that, is how, when we're looking at how we operate ourselves, how we govern, what are we doing to ensure that that is aligned with our needs? So I think that's where it would go, but important.
Just to sort of jump back to a point before this, so there's, you know, with 9 elementaries feed into 3 middle schools into 1 big high school, and I think consistency and transparency, because maybe I'm putting words in Kathleen's mouth, but I don't think anyone here wants to sort of like take the individuality out of each teacher by any means, but what's being taught and the way in which it's being implemented, keeping their personal style there, you know, or even who's in what class, you know, I mean, just this is in the weeds, but you know, like some schools they said, oh, sorry, you know, there's no matter what you get on this star report, or there's no more room in this particular class because there's already 18 kids in this advanced math class, but there's, you know, there's no more, this one's like capped out, but if you're at such and such school, so that we have like disparate, there's just a lot of different, there's not a lot of transparency, but there's also different things are done, drastically different things are done in different schools. So there's ways to sort of like, and there's ways because of this, because of, you know, maybe a bunch of different schools feed into one middle school, there's ways to sort of beat the system, you know, or someone transfers from this school to this school, and then they carry with it whatever they, you know, where they were placed before. So we're doing sort of we're tracking, but as a result, we are teaching different things to different students based on different standards at each school. So that's also.
But if the expectation of the student doesn't change, that within this year, certain things have to be learned.
Right.
Regardless of how they're.
I'd like to make my point
Yeah,
a
I'm
little
thinking
clearer.
about it in that same way. Basically, by the end of 5th grade, every science student is going to know how to fill out a lab report and do a lab, right?
Yes.
It's not how the teacher teaches the
Right.
aspect, they're all going to come out with the same
The
skill set.
curriculum is not a script.
Right.
Right,
You're not, and a friend of mine taught kindergarten in a large city, I won't mention which one, but at that time, they were scripted. They actually had a book that they had to follow. And she said what was really frustrating is that you saw yourself losing a kid, and you couldn't take the time to stop and ask them and spend 5 minutes with that child. You had to keep plowing through, and more kids got left behind. That's not what you're looking for.
no, I want to make my point clear, since I feel like it's been taken in a few different directions,
Okay,
is
well,
that,
that's why I wanted.
yes, thank you, is that I think it's very important for the teachers to have autonomy in our classroom, because if you don't have personalities, you have robots teaching, so please, no one take that away. What I do think, though, is that on a positive note, there are some, I'm sure there's a 5th grade teacher at one school that's doing something great, and there's a 5th grade teacher at another school that's doing something great. So there should be cross-sharing, and I know there is already, but then you start to see that, and I can talk to personal experience where other parents are saying, as they enter middle school, interesting that you got to that point in the curriculum, we did not, and therefore we are struggling in X. And so that is where I think that that hasn't happened, and therefore you need to make sure it's consistent.
So in my mind, the role of the board would be to assure or ensure that there are processes in place that allow that cross-pollination to take place.
Thank you.
And I'm assuming that happens at the principals' meetings or the administrative meetings. But as a board member, I think that's the appropriate question to ask. What do we do to ensure that these practices are shared with each other and that we learn from each
All
other?
the good stuff,
Yeah.
there's a lot, right?
I think this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but I do think we also want to be careful that if we're talking about personalized pace in our math, that we're not necessarily saying that every child's going to get to the same point. So how do you
Yeah.
balance that? You know, I mean, there should be the ability for every child to do as much as they're capable of, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to end up in the same place at the end of the year.
CAPS has a really good saying for that. They talk about, in the current structure in most places, time is the consistent part and learning is the variable.
Right.
And in the new style, learning is consistent and time is the variable. And so it isn't that we're going to see how far we can get with a kid. It's just one kid might get it in a couple of days, one might take a marking period. The expectation of the child does not change. That child can still learn that, but maybe it takes them longer to finish second grade, or what we think of as second grade. That's taking it to the extreme, where we don't even do that anymore, but then I don't think that'll happen in our lifetimes, but maybe. But I think the expectation should never change. And that's why I think the idea that as a board, you want to ensure there's consistency and sharing of the good and taking advantage of the local talent.
But then they still have access to the same curriculum.
Yeah.
I mean, they still have access to the same curriculum, so, you know, Johnny and Susie have access to the exact same curriculum, and Johnny might go further, so that there's a chance that, you know, when you do get to that, you know, if you're trying to take care of those hiccups in 6th grade, 9th grade, all of a sudden it's like, well, we both had access to this curriculum, so we could reach our maximum potential at our own rate, but not one particular group that did not actually get exposed to that.
And we do have a guaranteed standards-based curriculum that everyone uses as a guide. And so as we are learning more about how students learn through personalized learning and being partners in learning, we're finding exactly that. There are some kids that will learn some things much faster and want to go in deeper and deeper, and then there are kids that need to have a little bit more support, more time. So we're learning as we're continuing to implement personalized learning as one of our major strategies in the district's strategic plan, by the way.
I think the most powerful slide you showed that really struck me was the light bulb.
So my question would be, what are the light bulb questions here as opposed to the candle versus something? So
Thank you.
what's the light bulb question on consistency? So does the board say, how can you guarantee us as the keepers of the flame here that every kid has access to equity, not necessarily equal, but equity? And you tell us how you're going to demonstrate that to us. We're not going to say we need 14,000 of this, or we need 22 test scores, or hours on it, or TEPL. We don't need to see every teacher's TEPL. You tell me how you're going to answer my light bulb question, and I won't ask you about the candles.
That's great. I think you've almost answered your own question. I mean, you have to think about what those big, the light bulb question might be, but I think it could be as simple as how you framed it right from the beginning. We have best practices, we have good things going on. How do we know that a child in one school who might need, I think we have to be careful, but I think you could legitimately say we have two children in two different schools who might benefit from the same practice in both schools. How do we ensure that both have access to the same if they need it? I think that's a legitimate question for a board member to ask, and it's not getting into the weeds. If you start saying, how do we ensure this test or that, then you're digging too deep. But I think it's legitimate to ask the question, how do we know that every child has access to the same skills, teacher skills perhaps, no matter which school they go to, because it shouldn't be a matter of zip code, as I sometimes.
And then what do we need to do as your board to overcome the barriers that you're facing?
Right.
And it could be that we add a staff development day, or we do something different, because teachers are saying we don't have enough time to talk to each other across schools. So it's asking what I always thought of as those light bulb questions, and then what's the role of the board in overcoming any barriers that schools or administrators or teachers are facing, answering the question or implementing what you want us to do.
Particularly, knowing that the strategic plan includes individualized instruction, that's probably a good place to look and see what does it say in terms of, is there articulation? The one thing we haven't gotten to in Lighthouse yet, and 'cause we would have done it last time, except we changed it around at the last second, but one of the conditions for success is strong professional development. In fact, I would argue it's probably the most important thing a board can do is provide high-quality professional development for staff to ensure success. And it's going to be different depending on what your expectations are, but whatever it is, that's, again, the light bulb question, what do you need from us to make this happen? You know, how do you envision PD, you know, with all the mandated programs out there, how many extra hours do we need to pay for example, to make sure teachers get a certain level? Do we have to have staff trained to be teachers of teachers versus paying a consultant to come in and do a big thing that often doesn't last until they've left the room? We want to make sure it's embedded, it's repeated. There's research that shows that you need 40 hours of something before it really affects the change in the classroom. So we don't want as a board to count the hours, but we do want to say, do you have steps in place to ensure that these are happening? Or if not, I'm assuming it's a budgetary thing, what do we need to do to change that?
So if we're ready to move on, I've got a separate topic.
Okay, well, can I wanted, because several people have offered a couple, several have said nothing. Does somebody else have something? I'm happy to hear Peter, but I want everybody to feel that they're included. Peter?
So I was trying to come up with a sort of all-encompassing academic goal, probably more for the district than the board, and I kept coming back to growth for all students. Just sort of as, yeah, I mean, that's really it. It's about personal learning, so it's growth for all students, benefits and everybody.
Do you want to say something about that or can I?
Go for it.
So I support that, but I'm very interested in the new graduation requirements and how we are lining up the courses, the talent of our staff to be able to teach the wide range of courses that we now need in our high school. And I want to make sure that every ninth grader is on track for graduation, looking at that new framework of the new graduation requirements. And the reason that I put that as a goal is because it's timely. We are all facing this mandate from the state. All districts have to ramp up for it. So I would love to have that as one possibility, and I do support the growth goal.
Which I do agree, I think probably goes on the district list. High school graduation requirements probably is on both. I'm just guessing, because there is a long-term sort of district need to discuss it, but I would say also there might be, at the board level, how do we ensure that this takes place this year or within the next year or two?
I think one of the
Right.
things that,
Was it last year that we had to make some concessions to have kids graduate?
year before, yeah, and I think
That was not-
the graduation requirements going to be effective next year. One thing on the growth for all students is I was actually trying to think of the fact that we talked about this, I think, with you last time. We have big goals in the strategic plan. We don't have annual goals, and maybe that's got to be tied to the growth for all students. What is it we want to see each of that plan? Something missing.
Ignorance speaking now, is there, on top of the strategic plan, is there any sort of district improvement plan?
There's
I mean,
individualized
sometimes
school, there's individualized school improvement plans, which we've been doing annually forever,
Yeah.
but there's no big general goal for the
You
district.
kind of don't need both, but some districts do, because the strategic plan's the book that sits on the shelf, and the district improvement plan is the one we actually work off of, which is why I asked it the way I did. But even with the school improvement plans, there ought to be something within there that talks about growth and the
Yes.
metrics.
Yeah,
Because,
it does, but we don't have one across the district, because while we're looking at individualized school data, how are we doing across the district? What are the targets, where are we now, what is the target for this year? Because you can set an end target for 5 years from now, but if you don't set those interim checkpoints, it's sort of like Jennifer and Lauren were saying about the staticness of the goals. It doesn't matter, if we get to the end and we find we didn't do it, that's on us because we didn't actually do
Right.
anything in between.
well, the format for developing a strategic plan is a little different than the format for developing a district improvement plan, which is why some districts do both at some level. But the district improvement plan or the school improvement plan is basically your staff reviews the data, and based on what the data shows, some people will say data show, but it's okay to say shows.
No, it's plural.
Yes,
It's plural. I got points off my senior thesis for that.
so anyway, regardless, they look at the data. They look at the data,
It still stinks.
but they look at the data, and from that data determine what, first of all, what is, but second, what's possible, because part of that is sort of that external scan too. What, if we implement this, knowing how it's worked in other areas, if it's done with fidelity, we can expect X, Y, Z. Those benchmarks should almost be self-evident, at least to your professional staff, and they would bring it to the board and say, based on what we're looking at the data, here's what we think we should do, and here's how it will work over the next 2 or 3 years. By the way, in order to be successful, do I
That's what you shared with us.
What? Sure.
Ann's already doing it secretly.
There you go.
Not secret.
But that gets back to the board practice or expectations. If that stuff's out there, and it may even be presented to you, or not, but if not, you probably want to see that, because it is important to have benchmarks, but I would argue it's usually not at the board table where we create those.
Oh, no, I would love for the board to create it, but I think it would be good for the administration to put a marker down at the beginning of the year and say, here's where we think we're going to get this year, here's the strategies we're going to use. At the end of the year, come back and say, this is how we did. Next year, might look different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does growth for all replace like closing the achievement gap?
They're sort
I don't
of
know.
together.
I guess, but if they all grow at the same pace, then no.
Yes.
Well, they're two different problems.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
One is a challenge to curriculum, the other is perhaps a greater challenge, because it could involve, well, that's a good question. Maybe if it's not growth for all, but reaching maximum potential, some kids may have, I don't know. You started-
Well, I would say put achievement gap down, that's a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is, to me, it's different too.
I debated that and I just ended up putting every student succeeds.
Yeah, except the federal government has
I
ruined
don't
that.
like the word.
And what does succeed mean?
Yeah.
Just in terms of a metric like growth for all, maybe not to put up there, but just a thought to put out there, like, there are, and again, I mean, I guess it's kind of consistency, but some of our schools, especially the elementary level, were testing the heck out of some of these kids. So like,
Yeah.
STAR test is happening, and I guess parents can request it, so at certain schools are just like more and more and more, I mean, they're taking so many tests that it's detrimental, so we can still probably in a lot of cases measure their growth without a test every, I don't know.
Too many
Partway
tests are
testing
one
every
shots.
month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
too many tests don't give us long.
Hardware's
Every
testing
month.
monthly, I know, I don't know, my kids aren't
No,
there,
probably not
but
monthly.
I've heard through the grapevine.
Right, right.
I was at
You know,
an
the Georgia
SBA
test
conference
stuff.
one year, and I met this old Texas school board member, and he goes, you can't fatten a hog by weighing it. And I heard that, and it just,
It's one
there's a
metric,
balance,
that's
there's a
good.
balance, there really is. In Finland, they do very little testing, there's no
Yeah, the
national
happiest
test.
can be.
Yeah, and they do very well, so we may not be on the right path, but unfortunately, that's the expectation for so many.
I get that, but I'm just saying that in some cases we're over testing.
I think there are boards that have drawn that line and said,
Right.
test less, and you could too.
Something to maybe think about.
We did that a couple of years ago, we thinned it out, and now it seems like it's creeping
It's
back.
creeping back.
Certain schools
Yeah,
are
and that's
testing
actually, I actually had It's funny, my two things, I think we are effective, because we are all very consistent, I think. And one of the things that I had was achievement for all, and right above it is, are we, and I think you can make it a sub-bullet now that I think about it, is are we using our testing, our assessments, whatever you want to call it, to improve customized instruction, right? And that is where I feel like you are with IEPs and things like that. I hear very good things, that people get feedback, and I was like, this is what we have to do. But I feel like not for the rest of the population is that happening. And so if you're getting detail on where someone is weak, use it. And I hear we're not. That's
To your credit, the last time we talked about this, I wrote down data validated culture.
Yeah.
What do you write?
There you go.
Data validated culture.
So if you're using the data, use it.
Data-informed instruction,
Right,
yeah. The technology is finally catching up to the need, so I think you have more capacity to do that than you used to, and it's getting better, and I think it's in the works. So unfortunately, it's not there yet, I think, in a lot of places, but I think, again, is that light bulb question is, are we going in that direction? Is our goal that when we assess a child, it will have a direct impact on what that child learns tomorrow, even? I mean,
Right, and it should, it's supposed to,
Yeah.
right? So that's the goal.
And I feel like that ties a little bit into the, I know you guys are all looking at the math pilot, you know, because we have a pilot that we've implemented of personalized piece in math. And as a, right, I'm gonna get there too. As a, but, you know, also as a model, you know, for how we personalize learning in general, but this was sort of where we started with this. And I think that was sort of exactly the point of that pilot, is to say, as you see what a kid's doing, you then know where they go next. And there are a lot of great digital tools out there that do help do exactly that in terms of keeping track. And in fact, one of the wonderful things about it is that the concept of formative versus, you know, summative assessment becomes less distinct, because you can grab that data at any point you want because it's all there. And so you can say, we know exactly what, you know, Common Core standards have been met on any day without actually having to do an assessment, because it's constantly keeping track of that for you. So I think in some ways it allows you to have, whether you call it continuous assessment or no assessment, you know, and you still get that information back. So I think maximizing that part would be great.
Right.
while at the same time making sure that the system is not so cumbersome that a teacher has to spend half their day
Yes.
doing something. And-
Right, but a lot of the digital tools that are out there now don't require teachers to do any of it.
Right. And I think that's important. It's transparent, but it's seamless and it's effortless.
Right, I meant, right, I immediately wanted to qualify that, which is in terms of recording the data, they don't need to do it. They're clearly still teaching and directing, and very important to all the process. I didn't mean to be misunderstood in that way.
We've shifted, I think, our conversation to district goals by and large. You have more on your list?
I have on my list. We are in the middle of sort of a financial cleanup. We had an outside firm come in, process and procedures around our facilities and our project management, and I think there's got to be a board tie-in to that. You know, we have to own that at a high level, although Ralph and Lori have been obviously on the ground doing the day-to-day.
Sometimes underneath it.
So, yeah, that is true too, where we want to avoid, I love to dig. But the idea of how we do project planning, management of the project, we ask for capital money, sometimes we don't spend it in the year that we ask for it, and we're starting to get pushback on the town side, and I think the board's got to get a little more engaged in that, although Lori probably doesn't want that, but it's okay.
She just wants help,
She
right?
does, and I want to get her help, because I also wrote staffing down, Lori, because I think we've got to make a commitment to getting this right, and the board's got to own that piece of it, which is, from a macro level, what can we do to help our staff do the job that we expect of them, and then we need to give them the runway to go and actually do the job. But I think we haven't really spelled that out, and it's sort of a learning from what we've gone through from the JC project to where we are today.
So if I'm going to articulate that in 4 or 5 words.
Lori could probably do a better job than I can. You've been living it.
Oh, gosh.
I can do it.
Okay.
We have a model which it's hard to believe that she's still sitting there awake. But, because we have a savvy model where Anne's in charge of both capital and the budget, and transportation, and security, and food services.
What else, what do we miss?
I didn't miss much.
Facilities?
Facilities, got that. So, yeah, there's 2 jobs there. Yeah. So we need to split that job a little bit, because we need a COO, but we also need someone that's gonna take charge of capital, getting that.
But I think Peter was talking about the goal of how do we stay better informed as the,
Right, what is our job, what's our responsibility and our job versus what we need the district to do? And we're the enabling function, right? We go get the money to do this stuff, we get the reporting, where are you, how are you getting from A to B? But the day-to-day work is certainly within the district administration bucket.
Well, one of the fears I have with boards that this often becomes a budget decision rather than I'll use the word academic, but in this case that's marginal. But the idea that we're making a decision based on the need rather than whether we can afford it or not. We have to start with that premise. That, to Ralph, we know we have too few people doing too much work. We need from you a plan to resolve that. We don't want to make it a budget decision, although it will impact budget and we may ultimately have to modify it because of budget. But let's make a clean decision. How do we support that area so that it's done effectively and well without killing anybody? And then after we revisit it, because back to the question about how do we align our goals and our vision with our budget, as part of that discussion is not only do we have to do better, or we want to do better in the classroom, but we also want to be more effective. You are more effective as a school district when everything works. And so there's a real good tie-in, I think, to do we have a structure, do we have personnel, do we have facilities in line with what we need to do? And if the answer is no, give us a plan. Tell us what we need. We make the decision, and then obviously have to follow it through the budget process. But at least we've articulated it, and when we go to that conversation with the community about, what do you mean you're hiring somebody in central office? We have all these central office people already, why do we need another one? Well, what's our talking point? We have one person doing the work that in most districts would be 2 or 3 people, et cetera, et cetera. You can write that story. But it gets back to the storytelling. How do we make sure people understand? But I think the light bulb analogy would be just say to Mr. Mayo, we understand, we recognize from everything we've heard that we are understaffed in that area. Please give us a plan. Does that make sense? Or, I don't know that it has to be more complicated than that. You're the enablers, but just by saying, please tell us what you need, I think that's could be enough. I don't know that a goal helps that along. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I want to hear from you. So I don't know.
I had a different thought that I thought was where you were heading with this. But, we had an audit recently looking at the process in terms of capital plans and keeping track of that and helping to be effective in doing that. And one of the things that I asked at the time was, I feel like a lot of the time that we're spending is because we get so far in a process and a plan, and then other town bodies go, nope. And you've put so much time and effort into this, and then you're kind of starting over again. So I said to the guy, I feel like we're starting partway through in the discussion you're having. We need to start at the beginning in terms of understanding how to do this, and how do we better communicate, and I put this under communication, but how do we, and sort of facilities both, how do we better communicate with our town bodies to be more efficient in our processes when we're talking about plans? So to be more concrete, we're looking at, the stadium at the high school and making changes in that. And this has been a process been going on for years now, and it kind of keeps starting over and it keeps starting over. I'm like, why can't we have more communication, more input in the beginning so that we don't get 90% through the way of planning something and then have to go back? And so that's a process that I think we need to improve, and I think some of that is a board responsibility to figure out how does our town work, how do we make this communication better so we can be more efficient in this process, because we're spending time on it, but our administrators are spending a ton of time on this too, and it's a waste of time.
I guess the question I have is how involved is anyone from the municipal side in any of this conversation? Or is it just basically board focused and then you present them with something or a progress report and say, oh, we don't like that? Should there be a place earlier in the process where they're at the table?
It's a mixed bag. You know, sometimes we have the municipal person on the committee and they don't come. Depending on which body you've invited or whether the right people, and sometimes you don't know the right people until you're pretty far down the road. Based on the way that our budgeting works, we basically request money for something, and then by the time we get back to, here's the full project, there's that disconnect.
Yeah.
So that's,
I think it goes back to what I think Lauren, you said in the very beginning, or somebody, about going out and selling this. We're always reactive. We're never proactive. So we get, people come to meetings more prepared than we are and say all sorts of things, true or not. Or the paper gets the story out and then we don't respond. So we don't do a good job of getting out in front of the issues. And I think having one member from a committee on your committee when you have a project, that doesn't do it. You really have to make the effort to go out and beyond and go to your district meetings or whatever, or ask to make a presentation to the BET. You just have to do the work.
I think we should have liaisons to town municipal departments that are active. I think someone needs to show up at Parks and Rec, someone needs to go to planning and
I
zoning.
do. Parks and Rec, Parks Committee, Park
We
Board.
still don't know when we need an MI, if we need an MI.
That's
We-
not my problem.
No,
That's the
in
town
general.
doesn't know when they need
In
an MI,
general.
neither does the first selectman.
I'm speaking in a general way. This is not about Barbara O'Neill. This is
I know, but I'm
about.
telling
all
you,
right,
the
let's
MI
let
process
you,
is
let's
very
let you
important.
talk.
So my comment is, we need to assign people to have strong relationships with the head of P&Z, with the head of Parks and Rec, with the first selectman. It's not about the BET, it's about the process that you follow before you get in front of the BET, whether you've got all your ducks lined up. And we have had so many reversals. Should we test soil, should we not test soil? I mean, there are steps to be followed. And the board gets out in front and does a great job of selling, then we have to pull back our remarks because a step in the process was missed that the board didn't know. So I think it's about liaisons to municipal departments and the first selectman, as well as constantly keeping on track with the BET. And I do that, I talk to them all the time, continuously through the year, and I think that helps.
Sometimes it's things get lost in translation and there's communication gaps. It's again, point of view or it gets into a little, I'm not disagreeing necessarily with what you said, but I just, no, I'm not. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I just think that, again, depending on who you're speaking to or who the representative is, or the liaison is, sometimes there's some blame shifting always going on, right? Because there is so many governing bodies, so, and that's just the reality, so it's hard to sometimes pinpoint where it gets lost, where communication might get lost, like, and go dig around in the soil for it, but it's hard, I don't know if that's necessarily gonna solve that problem. It might be a component, but I think that it's, I don't know if that made any sense, but.
Part of the answer to the question or to the observation might come when we talk about community engagement, because part of that communications plan ought to be how do we better communicate with the other agencies in town. I think that's part of it. The other thing I would say is that if you're getting reactions to a proposal or a solution, you've already lost the battle. That somehow we have to have an opportunity for people to be included in the conversation when it's still just articulating the problem. Do we have half-empty schools, or do we have a school that's so bad that Wi-Fi can't work because everything's, whatever. That we're not presenting you, we need a new football field. We're presenting the fact that we have kids getting injured because they're tripping on bad soil, or we don't have the capacity, or we have bleachers that are falling apart, whatever the issues are that require a new stadium, we're not going to them saying, we need a new stadium. We're saying, here's the list of things that are going on, help us problem solve. So get them involved in articulating what the problem is, then offer the solution. That's different than you doing all that work, getting ready, planning, doing all of that analysis, putting together a plan, and then saying, oh, we want to do this. And by then, they don't have ownership because they weren't involved in the conversation earlier. It's just a thought, sometimes that helps.
I think it's hard with this, get them involved in the conversation earlier. When we were going through the budget committee meetings, we had two BET liaisons come to every budget meeting. But then it was other people on their board that started to ask all the questions, and I think we run into it too, where you've got a couple of people have an understanding, and then there's one person who hasn't necessarily been involved, and they're the ones that are all of a sudden like, well, wait a second, you know, so it's like maybe the committee structure somehow, and maybe it's back to that as well. I don't know what the answer is.
So I think part of it might, the question is, how do you turn that representative from the other agency into an advocate? So that they're not just, yeah, I was there, I can testify to what was said, but rather, we really need to do this. Somehow we have to get them to become advocates for it, and not just part of the conversation. And I don't have the skill to figure that out tonight with you, but I think.
Make it a goal, I don't think we're gonna fix it tonight.
Right.
Correct.
Can I say one other thing? I just think that consistency of messaging helps.
Yes.
And so yes, we have liaisons technically to the BET, and I know we all do our different thing, but maybe we're not consistent in our messaging. Maybe something's more important to me than you. I'm not saying that, but if we were all like, this is what is really important we get through right now. Cardinal Stadium is really important. Gaetano, you're going to talk about it. Peter, you're going to talk about it. Lori's talking about it. Then it's like the news cycle, right? I mean, you just keep hearing it and you start to believe it. So that's one. I think the other thing is, I know Ralph had started taking some of the BET members on tours, right, of our plans. And I thought that was brilliant because it goes back to going into the schools and learning, seeing something falling is more effective than seeing a picture of it. So perhaps if we did that quarterly or something like that, so it's not on an ad hoc basis because we all are very busy, that would be something we could think about.
We did that too. We had the day before school started was always the day to look at the schools because they were cleanest, freshest, or whatever. And they'd have the minibus and we'd all drive with the board. And we got to inviting the town council, which was great because they're walk through the kitchen and there was these giant steam kettles back then. And the director of facility goes, there's only one of these four that works. The other three don't have parts, and they stopped making them in 1962. And so, but when we came to them and said we really need to renovate our kitchens, they got it.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of getting them into the facility. They have to feel like they're theirs. They can't be your facilities. They have to be our facilities.
That's a good idea, because we do visit the schools on opening day, like each board member, so
Right.
yes, maybe we should add on.
That's good.
Some of the.
Quarterly, like we go, not us, RTM members, BET
Right.
members,
Right.
we can join, but more for them.
The RTM Education Committee sends its members out
They do.
actually to each school. So each one is assigned to a school, and they do that before they come back to talk about our budget, which is actually pretty helpful. I'm looking at the clock, and it's 8 o'clock.
Good.
Those sheets are empty. You've got some information here.
Yes.
Maybe we want to start distilling down.
Gaetano has more ideas.
Not. If there's more, let's get
I don't
it.
know, we were given a
Ra-
thing with like.
Rapid fire. I know, I got more
categories
too.
And 2 on each category, so I'm trying to not come up with them, but. Well, this is great. Well,
You're great.
I
Can you
think
sheet
we
you're actually
gave us homework.
Sorry, Laura, take
I
care.
did my homework. It's hard, but.
Okay, but what I'll try to ask you to do is try to focus on the things that'll get us back to board goals. Because if the sort of intent of the evening was to talk about everything as much as we could. I think it's obvious if we can get board goals done, we'll be doing well. So if you have a couple things that you want to just highlight, we won't even talk about them right now, which then we can talk about when we do district or admin goals, or at least suggest to them, but
Speaker.
share.
I'm thinking this is close to board anyway, but in terms of fiscal management and budget, we've been talking about sort of a program review, that a system for us to go through and evaluate the things that we're doing and the cost as we start thinking about how to build our budget. So we've talked about program reviews and creating a system for that. And I think that would be good for us to do.
I guess I have to try to have a better understanding. You had something similar?
So the superintendent, with help from some of the administrators, has been doing a program review. So all programs, how many kids does it serve, measures of effectiveness, the cost, all of that information, so that when we get to building our next budget, that information is at their fingertips, and they can measure whether things have been effective. It's sort of the exercise of keep, toss, or fix. Right. We don't do a zero-based budget in Greenwich, so this is the closest we're going to get.
So we use it as an administrative tool so that we can see what is being spent and then what is valuable. Do we need to spend more? Do we need to spend less? Are we getting what we need from it? Are we getting return on investment?
And when we have
We use that
limited
as a
resources,
tool.
is it enough of a priority that even if it is working, but it's affecting far fewer students, sometimes we have to make a tough decision.
Yeah, so this is something the administration is doing and will ultimately feed into the discussion within the board about what the priorities become.
So it sounds like if it's already in process, a goal doesn't really help it.
I agree,
Well-
if it is in process.
I feel like it's sort of in its early stages, so to me, what I have written is to have a strong program of review, because I feel like it's gonna probably take us a few years to get it to really where it's working well, but I'd like to, well, I mean, I sort of feel like, you've got your big program, you've got your little program, it's gonna be a while, I think, before it's really effective, and so I just feel like I want it to keep, I don't know, I want it to keep going.
Where are we? Like
Well, we're trying to get to where we distill down the board goals.
No, I know.
But
I'm
Gaetan
saying,
still
where
had a
are we?
couple of-
But I'm saying, like, she's mentioned a few years, like, where are we in terms of program review? Like, where,
That's a question for the superintendent.
Where are we?
where are we?
We're-
Just in a general sense, like, kind of a, yeah, sorry.
We're currently, we've divided up the work again.
Yeah.
Some people are working on curriculum areas, and other people are working on other types of programs. It's all based on units right now. And we're moving along. We're populating the dashboard. And it's taking a lot longer than we thought it was going to take, but we're moving along. We showed the district leadership on Monday. We gave them an example of what the dashboard will look like, and they appreciate it. They thought it was going to be helpful. So I also think it's going to be a nice onboarding tool for learning. So we're moving along, but it's a lot harder than we expected.
Yeah.
Not every program has a goal attached to it. So that's something else that we're going to have to dive into.
No, it's a big job. I get that it could take a long time, but in terms of like a snapshot into it, in terms of just, I mean, I know it's, and I wouldn't want it to be like 3 years before we kind of see.
It could go under the best practices, I mean, in a sense, you're
Right,
basically
right.
like best practices.
I think it's
across
important
your
to lose it
disciplines.
entirely, like, but.
Just to get back to my point.
I don't. Okay. You guys answered my question. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Not to force the issue, but are we about ready?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay, so the first one that I think was pretty clear was continue the strategic planning process. And I think there was consensus that it's just sort of extending it or continuing to work with the existing plan rather than to restart the process. Is that?
Mm-hmm.
So like to tweak it,
Right, you want to.
modified version.
You want to take a look at it and see where we are.
I know, right?
Well, I'm just writing it as continue strategic planning process
Yes.
because part of the process is continuing to review and update, et cetera. So,
Why don't we say continue existing strategic
Okay.
Maybe
For a year.
No, just strategic planning process, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think it implies what we need it to imply then.
We can add existing.
Do board goals change each year? Like typically when we set goals, they change each year. So would
In
this
most
change
cases,
again
I
next
would
year?
expect them to, but
Okay.
not always. If you could take it off because it's far enough along, it doesn't have to remain a priority because it's just part of the work now. Or it might mean that we're done, or it might mean we still need to do it, but we don't want 25 goals and it's gonna drop off the list. So there's a few different reasons, but it doesn't, typically I would see these as a 1-year target. And then at the end of that year, you reassess whether it stays on the list or not, just like some of the things that we looked at earlier.
So would the goal for next year to be transition from the current strategic plan to the new strategic plan?
No,
No.
the,
That's a 1-year goal. So we're not sure we're gonna.
I think maybe the better continued strategic plan implementation. All right, how about continued strategic plan implementation? Because we're gonna keep with this plan for now,
That's good.
but it allows for continued work.
and that includes more focus on the work and aligning your board meetings with that work, so that you influence it at a greater extent, to a greater extent. I think that's just implied, I don't think we have to write that.
So are we saying that we're not gonna modify this plan at all in terms of expanding it maybe to look at other, because we said before that most of it is focused on students, so we're not looking in any way to change this? We're gonna stick with the categories we have?
I think the idea for 2019, 2020 is to ride this plan, and we may potentially at some point in the year say, okay, what's working, what's not working. This doesn't discount that. Because you raised a good point about human, capital, the adults in the room.
Right.
But
If we don't have that.
Well, I think I will restate that I think it's really important for us to evaluate this plan extensively. We need to really dig into it and look at what is it doing, how's it doing it, what, have we set it up appropriately, do we, so I'm not necessarily set on needing to completely change the goals or do other things, but I think we need to evaluate it really extensively.
See, to me, that's part of
That is
the
part of our
potential of a
process.
strategic planning process, is that realigning, reviewing, even perhaps changing the goal if necessary, doesn't mean you're not going through that entire surveying and focus
Right,
groups and all that other stuff.
exactly.
Yeah, you may be changing expectations, but you're not doing all the other stuff.
Right.
one more time.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next thing that stuck out in my mind was the board wanting to, I'll say, review its processes to ensure that you are working working effectively. And that would include the subcommittees, it would include your meeting agendas, et cetera.
Better managing time.
How do we want to phrase that?
More effective.
Increase.
Yeah. Effectiveness and efficiency, right?
Right.
Because efficiency is the time component.
I don't like the word efficient, I like the word effective, because efficient means we got out at 9 o'clock. Effective means we did something by 9 o'clock.
I agree.
But if,
You could do both.
both,
Certainly
you
want
can be effective and efficient at the time, can't you?
I wouldn't want to only be efficient.
We could, I could always sort of fine tune these later, I want to get the debate thought
Yeah.
out, while some of us are fresh and some of us aren't. All right, so, and that includes the committees and,
Right?
Yep,
And then you collapse the next two.
yeah, we did.
well, the whole communication thing, which got into,
Communicating expectations and communication, right?
would there be value? I guess trying to look at the deliverable on this is, does the board feel ambitious enough to develop a communications plan that will look at effectively communicating with the community, other agencies? I mean, you have the advantage of having someone on staff that sort of understands all that, could probably help articulate it. I don't want to make more work for anybody, though.
Right, but let's be clear, this is about the boards communicating to the community, to the other governing bodies. This isn't about the district communicating about celebrations in schools or great results or
But it should be aligned and supported, and in the last communication plan update, there is a section for the board.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it could be combined.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there's alignment, right? It's also a district.
But it is about what
Yeah.
the board is communicating in your role in the
Right, right.
communications, right?
So yeah, a board communication plan aligned to the district's communication plan.
We should be communicating the same message.
Yeah.
Right.
This is where
I mean, it's all I mean, you know, you have to start with the content development and the main messages, tying it back to our core values or our core mission or our core vision. I mean, that part all has to be aligned, and we all have to be saying the same thing.
Yes.
You know, I might be doing it through school stories, and you might be doing it from a more, you know, budget policy-oriented level. And, you know, we're all basically selling the same
Coming at the same
thing.
thing, right, right.
The thing that, and again, I'm not the total expert on this, but we did a lot of research on this when we were putting our model together. A communications plan is deliberate and it's strategic. It isn't something that we just try to figure out a bunch of stuff we want to do, that we want to have, you know, who are our target audiences? More importantly, or as importantly, who are our key communicators? Because we often think about who we want to talk to, but we don't always talk about who are the communicators. And in a lot of buildings, it's the building principal. But what did they learn? Have they been given PD that helps them be an effective communicator? Maybe not. You know, some of them may be very good naturally, or maybe they had some other experiences, but you as a board can provide the resources they need to become effective. So, I guess my point is that it should be a deliberate, strategic initiative. I was going to say plan, but that would just be confusing.
And can I just add too that the other piece, in addition to knowing your audience, is really understanding what your purpose and your objective is.
Yep.
Because that's where you're going to then, from there, develop your messages, understanding what's going to motivate that particular audience to act the way that you want them to act. And then you start talking about your tactics. That should be the last part, and that actually is the easy part.
Yeah.
The discipline comes in when you're really talking about the audience and the purpose and really making sure that everybody's in alignment on that.
Right. But in essence, the board is making a commitment through a goal to becoming more effective communicators. Okay, that's 3. And that includes, I should just say includes budget. We don't want to lose sight of that, because that was an important thing.
Yeah.
Very important goal, prepare the district for the new superintendent. Prepare the new superintendent for the district. Peter used the term onboarding, that,
I know, it's such corporate.
yeah.
Yeah.
Acclimate.
Successful integration. What's an education term?
How many syllables can we crank out in one word? That usually is the measure.
It's got to be an acronym if it's an education term.
I guess in a sense it's, is it really, is your role to sort of develop the relationship with the new superintendent? Is that part of it? Is that enough to verbalize what is a lot more than that? But in essence, you have to start to develop a team.
Onboard and collaborate.
I think we're going to try to avoid the word onboard, but
Orient.
Collaborate.
orient.
What's the outcome you want?
Collaborate.
What's the outcome you want?
We want her to learn everything about being a superintendent in Greenwich, Connecticut.
No, I want us to create an
Do you have a good
effective,
word, Tony?
an effective partnership so that we can achieve.
How do you measure that? How do you measure
Okay.
Writing and mentoring.
Effective partnership and
Successful integration, I like my word, Lori. Maybe it's because it's a financial term, that's why I really like it.
Well, if you're trying to ensure this successful,
She said it well, ensure effective partnership.
I think there's lots of that.
that's good.
Collaborative, great. Effective. Collaborative partnership. Chief proceedings.
I like that.
Collaborative rather than effective?
No, well, they're effective.
I think it's got to be collaborative if it's a partnership, I would think.
Right, yeah.
With incoming,
I think ineffective is up to you.
Three times that word. Collaborative.
okay,
I know, sounds so good. I know.
that's a lot right there between the strategic plan and the new superintendent. All right, well, this is strategic plan, strategic plan.
Regular work you're already doing.
Yeah, right? I feel like we should do right.
What else, separating the district, 'cause in fact, for this evening's purposes, I'll go back and I'll separate those out and then share all that with you, so we don't have to physically do that tonight. Because like I said, our real goal is to come up with these board goals tonight.
Did we, Peter, you had talked about a data validated culture?
Yeah, but I don't know that that's a board goal, as much as it is a district goal.
Yeah, okay. To support it, to support the data, I mean, because we certainly have our partner, which is,
If you ask for the data, you're gonna get it.
you know.
Well, we do, it's part of the standard format for reports.
She's like, we don't ask for
And you said before, if the administration sticks to the standard format for
I
reports.
understand that, but I
Well, and that still falls under the board effectiveness goal, which is, so I don't think we do, yeah. So as I look at the rest of these, they really start to fall into the other categories. I'm not sure any of these really enforce a good number. I mean, I'm not trying to rush you along. I don't want you to stay up all night if you don't have to.
I guess I get the focus on the academic,
Mhm.
you know, the growth, all that's gonna go under two. I mean, board effective, like if we, I mean,
Strategic plan.
okay, all right, okay. Right, gotcha. But that would be where we would do the time management.
Yeah.
Oh,
In
board
terms of,
effectiveness.
yeah, if you decide you
Right.
want to spend a certain amount of time
For
actually
achievement.
focusing on the students at these board meetings.
Well, that's true, yeah, right.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe
We got
board
it.
effectiveness and, because I think the word is, effective is important, you want to be effective, but it's also that you align your practice with your needs, which I don't know if that's the same as effectiveness. That you want to do the work you need to do to get the right work done.
Mhm.
But that's focusing on the strategic plan.
Yeah, it's fine.
Right.
Okay, go, team, go.
If the board is implementing the strategic plan, those things,
Well, everything should be aligned to the strategic plan,
Yeah.
right? Otherwise, you get a question of what it is we're doing.
right.
I mean, could you,
But two to me means, oh, yeah.
You go.
No, go, yeah.
I was gonna say, maybe with the board effectiveness, the things we're talking about, it could be subsets of strategic plan and communications. So with board effectiveness, you know, with the strategic plan, one of your strategies for achieving that goal is going to be talking about the strategic plan in every meeting. And under communications, one of your strategies for being a more effective communicative board is to have run an efficient board meeting and a clear, timely board meeting. So they could be, so number 2 could effectively be strategies under 1 and 3, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot more baked into that as well, right? It's about more than communicating, it's how we do our business. It really is about how we do our business.
Are we using our committees effectively? Are we, is our agenda aligned properly? I think from everything I've heard over the last few meetings, this board really wants to, I'm putting words in your mouth, but really get your act together and really do a great job. And
So you want a specific goal?
yeah.
so I think that rises to the level of the goal.
And enjoy being on the board and, you know, feeling like you're contributing and that just.
I also see, to me, the first goal is working on the strategic plan itself, which I think is different than continuing to evaluate achievement and the things in the current strategic plan. So I'm actually a little worried the way I read those is that, we don't, I don't know if it's a board goal, but we don't really have sort of continuing to support the academic achievement of the students on there.
That's a good point.
But it's not a part of the strategic plan?
That's embedded in the strategic
It was,
plan.
but my thought with the first goal was that it was the work of evaluating the strategic plan and potentially segueing into a new modified whatever it is strategic plan, which is a little bit different than functioning with the strategic plan.
No, I don't want to put words in Lauren's mouth, so I'll let her say it, but I think the idea, which I'm totally on board with, is this plan may need more time to bake, and we shouldn't be rushing into whatever the next iteration might be, because there's a lot to learn from actually doing this one.
I agree, because we just started to get the metrics.
No, I know, so to me, evaluating it is a separate thing than continuing to work with it. So I don't necessarily want to continue to do what we've done this year. I do want us to evaluate.
I think the evaluation comes as we start to anticipate what the next one, what the changes are for the next strategic plan. Like the evaluation of how we did in this one, it's part and parcel as we prepare for the next one.
Right, and so my thought of number one is that next year we do start to evaluate this one. And not necessarily start building the next one, but that we start to evaluate this one. I mean, we already have the administrators starting to talk about what our next wave is going to be, and I'm like, wait, we need to stop and start evaluating this one first and understanding those issues. And I think there are things that we would do better with tweaked. I'm not saying start it over from scratch, and I don't necessarily want to wait another year before we even start evaluating things that might be better tweaked.
And I don't want to jump to evaluation without looking at all like the metrics and
Something to put in place.
making sure what we are doing is working.
And again, Tony's going to be here next year, and this plan has another year anyway on it, right? So, I mean, I feel like let's finish it out. If you, over the next year, if you want to start analyzing it with Tony before she starts to do the next one, or tweak the next one, I think that's something we can talk about at the end of 2020.
So one of the things I'm sort of reading into things I've heard is that you have not necessarily been driven, your work has not been driven by the strategic plan. It influences, but does it drive it? And I could be wrong. I'm seeing yes, I'm seeing no, so maybe we're unclear. But really driving into, diving deep into it and really living it is going to will have different results than what you may have had today. Let me put it that
So
way.
I'll say this out loud, we are in year 4 of the strategic plan due to turnover in staff, not just in the superintendent position, but other staff and principals in the buildings and the like. I feel like we're probably more in year 2 of the plan than we are in year 4 of the plan. And so I think implementation is coming in fits and starts, and that it's incumbent on us to make sure we're these the right goals. I don't think we can do that where we are today. I think we need more time with this to figure that out. So I don't have any problem measuring effectiveness while we're doing it. I have a problem saying we're ready to start the next one because I'm not sure that we need to move off of this one so fast.
I mean, a year of really working with this plan is going to tell you a lot more of what you're going to need for the future. And it might be at the end of the year, after really working through this, you might find, well, you know what, we're finding we're spending a lot of time on this and it's really not the issue it was, or it has, but we haven't done it well, or we've done it, so now it's time for something else. But you wouldn't necessarily know that right now. Maybe your staff does, but I could see easily, remember, this is for a year. So a year from now, after digging into this thing, and I think as you're doing it, you're naturally going to be looking, has this plan brought us to where we want it to go? I think that's part of the process.
So going back to the conversation we had earlier about having committees that are assigned a particular task, and then listening to those committee members as they're making suggestions, we created an ad hoc committee for the strategic plan to talk about what we think next steps would be, and we spent 3 hours working on that yesterday. So that was part of the discussion that at some point we were planning on bringing forward. And I was the first one at the last meeting who kept saying, let's not move on to the next strategic plan. We need to finish this one. So I don't want people to misinterpret that I'm trying to rush that process. But I do think that our last year of the strategic plan, it's an appropriate time for us to be evaluating it. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're gonna make big changes, but I think it would be strange for us not to spend some time evaluating it.
Now, this committee that was formed, that's ad hoc?
Yes, so we'll review that in November, whether that committee continues or not, and what the mission of that committee is.
So it's sort of built into the process already.
We had our first meeting as a
Yeah, so you have a committee that could make that recommendation. So even needing that in the goals is kind of superfluous because you're already doing it.
Barbara, Gaetan, and Peter.
So it sounds like there is a process in place to do that analysis, in a sense,
Well, to make a
to
recommendation.
make a recommendation, but to do that, you're gonna have to look at some things too.
Just our recommendation is that we look at it and evaluate it.
Right, and you guys are gonna come in April to tell us what you've talked about so far. That was the-
Well, do we have everything on the board side that we've articulated? I mean, I'll go polish it up and
So can I just ask you about process, because this is where we bogged down last time, right? We got together, we had a discussion, I went off, I tried to put it on paper, I shared it with everybody, we got back together, we had a discussion, we still weren't there. So my question about process is, after you polish it and we share it with everybody, are we putting this on the April meeting for an action item that these are the goals for next year? Well, hang on, Barbara, I just want to, maybe we can go around the table.
Okay. I think so. Are we gonna, I mean, we need goals. I mean, I think it's important in terms of,
And obviously, we can
how they
change them.
communicated. I mean, they need to be communicated, and we've already, hashed them out as best as we can, and, I mean, it needs to be out there. I think yes.
I don't see why not.
So I have a question, these are goals for when?
These would be goals for next year, but obviously, we should be working on these now. We think these are the right things to be doing. Onboarding a new superintendent, I think we need to be doing that. Can't wait till she turns up. Strategic plan, our work should be aligned to that now. I don't know why any of these wouldn't be things we'd be working on now.
So.
Well, except for the
my
strategic plan in my
primary-
mind has got huge gaps in it.
Okay, but we can work on that now. All right, Jennifer.
I am actually going to insist that it goes on the agenda because this is something from a fall meeting that didn't get done. And if we don't do it in the next meeting, then we've lost an entire year, and that's unacceptable to me. So I absolutely think we have to have this codified.
Barbara, do you want to talk more?
I would just like to see maybe the committee meet one more time before we take a vote on this,
Which committee?
the strategic plan committee. So maybe we can identify some of the things more clearly that we spoke about.
Well, I actually was gonna ask a question, which is, I think that's a great idea, go ahead and go and vote on it, but I feel like, we have 3 bullets that we wanna put under this, and we have 2 things that we want with that, and what's our next step once we've done that? Because just to say, okay, now we've got goals, but wait, like, what are the action parts? What are the different things that we're gonna do to make it happen? So it's a little bit like making a strategic plan and putting it on the shelf, to make board goals and not have a plan as how we're gonna do it. So, it could certainly be that one of the roles of the ad hoc committee is to flesh out our recommendation for bullet 1. And then maybe someone else, in some way, or what I wanna know is what's our plan from here?
So that's fine, so why don't we vote on it in April, so that we at least finally all agree the 4 things, hopefully. I think we might have enough votes in the room on that. And then we could decide if we want to give it to the committee or if we want to do board work to go flesh it out.
And I think different pieces are going to sit with different committees. So I think the first one, strategic plan committee, is a good place to have that conversation. I think the second one, we have an executive committee of the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary.
Yeah.
With the superintendent and policy governance, we basically set the agendas for the meeting. The full board votes on that, but we can actually start that work now, as you're already thinking through the committee. And obviously, we can get Tony's input on that as well. The communication plan, I think, is a little more amorphous. We'll have to figure out where that fits best. That may just be asking a couple of members to liaise with Kim, but we'll have to figure that out. And then the onboarding, think we all play a role in that. I think Tony's starting to reach out to people individually, and obviously there's a roadmap for doing this because we've done it a couple of times.
We have it on.
But what is the road, well, we should discuss the roadmap.
We certainly can do that because the board is going to have to actually set superintendent goals. So we needed to do ours before we could do that.
All right, so I will, I might be able to get that all done tomorrow. I'll send it to Peter because you took notes too, so you can fill in any blanks I may leave out.
I'm going to take a picture before you.
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
a picture.
I'll take a picture and I'll share that with everybody.
I'll translate it into English too.
Thank you.
That would help you to read in the
Future
future.
writings worse than mine. It's hard to do that.
It's Mr. Crow's fault. He was our handwriting teacher. I was left-handed and he kept sticking the pen in my right hand.
I still have the stencils they gave me. Doesn't work.
What?
All right, so are we pretty well set then for this evening?
Yes.
Can I ask a different question?
Sure.
I don't have a sense of where we're going with Lighthouse. Can we get an outline of kind of what our next steps are going, our meetings we have, what things we're anticipating getting out?
We actually have only one more meeting on the agenda. Basically, we have May 30th set as a self-evaluation. I think as we talked about last time, we would probably use the same form we did last year so that we can actually do a little comparison. So that session is available for Lighthouse. I don't know about anybody else. I thought the community engagement piece probably is the right way to end. If we can squeeze that all in on one night.
Give us some homework ahead.
Well, here's the dilemma that I'm facing, is the research that Lighthouse is based on deals heavily with the conditions that exist in high-achieving districts. You have not gotten that yet. I can give you materials that will help you. The community engagement module definitely is one of the most helpful modules, and if we maybe tack on an hour, I can do less conversation during the clicker part and go through the rest of it. It will at least, I think that's important before you have the conversation about communication, because it will give you some tools that you can use down the road. And then I guess the rest will be up to you. I mean, in terms of the process, we kind of turned a few things on their head as we went along because your needs were a little different than mine were. So it's hard for me to tell you what would be next. If we have one more session, it's my job to make it the most effective.
And can you tell us what we're missing? So maybe send out an email, it'd be interesting for us to know what we're not getting, and then, for us to make a decision about whether or not we want to.
Because we can continue this later on too. You might find in a couple months or something you want to do another session. Yeah, I can come up with something to at least give you the other options, the other things that are available.
And then when are we thinking about doing the other goals?
Good question. I mean, do you envision doing it like this? We don't really set the goals for the administration, so, and we don't truly set the district goals. We set super goals, and that we probably need to wait until Tony's on board, to be honest with you. We should all be starting to think about that. I think there's probably a commonality if we were all to try to come up with it. But I don't think we can formally do that. We can set a time after Tony joins to do that.
Do we want to try and set a meeting over the summer?
Well, she starts July 1, so probably very soon thereafter.
So we should start looking at dates.
Do that.
And some of us have negotiation. Yeah, some of
Yes.
us are working all summer, just so you know.
All right, if there's nothing else, Dr. Francis, do you want to make a motion?
That's
Move to adjourn?
I'll second that motion. All those in favor of adjourning?
6.
7-0. Thank you, everyone.